it was a contributing factor to me putting my back out. And on a Monday morning after a 3-day holiday weekend, I went to put my pants on to go to work and my back snapped. And I had had back issues in the past, but this was at a different level to the point I thought something broke and I was broken. But after an hour of doing the lesson, I stood up vertical with absolutely no pain. And it just left me deeply curious about what could have happened.
Welcome to Beyond the Pain, the podcast that explores what it really takes to break free from chronic pain and reclaim your life. I'm your host, Leigh Brandon, and someone who's spent over 2 decades helping people get to the root cause of pain that no one else could explain. Whether you're dealing with long-term back issues, joint pain, nerve discomfort, or mysterious symptoms that just won't go away, this show is here to help you go deeper. Because beyond the pain, there's clarity, strength, and power waiting for you. Each week, we'll uncover the physical, emotional, biochemical, and energetic causes of pain and how to transform them. Let's dive deep into this week's episode. Pain can change the way you move, the way you think, the way you feel, and the way you live your everyday life. And one of the most frustrating things about persistent pain is that even when you've tried treatments, therapies, exercises, stretches, or hands-on work, the relief can sometimes be temporary and the pain comes back again. So what if the missing piece is not simply doing more, pushing harder, or trying to fix the painful area? What if the answers lie in helping the brain and nervous system discover new movement options? In this episode, I'm joined by Beverly, a certified Feldenkrais practitioner and founder of Pauseture. Beverly's own journey into this work began after experiencing debilitating back pain, which eventually led her to discover the Feldenkrais Method, a gentle, awareness-based approach to movement education. In this conversation, we discuss how Feldenkrais may help people living with chronic pain, why persistent pain can sometimes involve the brain and nervous system becoming stuck in a loop, and how gentle, unfamiliar movements can help interrupt old patterns. We also explore why Feldenkrais practitioners do not diagnose, treat, or cure, but instead work as movement educators, helping people shift the focus from simply take my pain away to what do you want to be able to do again. For some people, that might mean returning to sport. For others, it might mean putting on their own socks, lifting a laundry basket, or moving through the day with more comfort and confidence. So if you've been living with chronic pain, recurring pain, stiffness, tension, or fear around movement, this episode may give you a very different way of thinking about your body and recovery. Beverly, welcome to Beyond the Pain. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Leigh.
Yeah, great to have you here. And to kick things off, can you start by sharing a little bit about your story and how you became a Feldenkrais practitioner, particularly helping people with chronic pain?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. In 2014, I was working at the Facebook Los Angeles office in an advertising sales role. It was a small office at the time, and I had a very dysregulated nervous system for a variety of reasons. A primary reason was I have always been sensitive to sounds, and the open workspace in this particular environment was a very noisy environment, and it dysregulated my nervous system even more, which led to me being quite reactive in the workplace. And frankly, I was struggling and wondering if I could keep my job. So I was holding in my reactivity, and we know what happens when you hold things in. It was a contributing factor to me putting my back out. And on a Monday morning, after a 3-day holiday weekend, I went to put my pants on to go to work and my back snapped. And I had had back issues in the past, but this was at a different level to the point I thought something broke and I was broken. So I immediately went to my primary care physician who assured me I was not broken and prescribed pain pills. So the first week I laid in the fetal position with my laptop at home, trying to work remotely in pretty excruciating pain. And by weeks 2 and 3, I knew I needed to get back to work. So I tapped into the modalities that had helped me in the past with the pain, but really nothing was helping, and I could not stand up vertical. The only way I could walk was in a 90-degree angle. And as fate would have it, at the end of the 3rd week of this pain, it really over the 3 weeks, it was not getting better at all, and it was actually getting worse. And by the end of the 3rd week, I had a planned vacation to a health and wellness resort, and as my sisters were going off to all the fun cardio kickboxing classes, I read the course descriptions, and there was one described as lie on the floor, which sounded really good to me, and lie on the floor and make small, gentle movements to improve your movement and your posture. And I thought, I'll give this a try. So I walked at a 90-degree angle into this lesson, and the instructor said, lie on the floor, close your eyes, and as tempting as it is, do not open your eyes and look at other students. I will not be demonstrating anything. And if you're confused, that's okay. Just interpret my instructions to the best of your ability. And it was so unfamiliar for me because I had done yoga for years and I had always mimicked how a teacher or the surrounding people, or I would make modifications from how they were demonstrating. And I have ADHD and attentive type. I didn't know it at the time. So my listening skills were not particularly strong. So to do this type of lesson was very confusing and a little bit frustrating and unfamiliar for me. But after an hour of doing the lesson, I stood up vertical with absolutely no pain. And it just left me deeply curious about what could have happened. And every day that week, I returned to the class. Every day, it was different. Now, I will say that later in the day, the pain did come back. So I'm not saying one lesson was a miracle cure, but it did give me relief. And then I would fall back into my patterns and the pain would start to come back. And then I went to the next lesson, did a very different lesson. So by the end of the week, I was 100%. And I went to the teacher at the end of the week and said, why have I never heard of this? What is it? And how do I take this home with me? What do I do now? And she just said, I have 24 free lessons on my website. Do those. So that was my start of the journey.
Mm. So obviously that was Feldenkrais classes that you were doing. Why
Yes.
did why did she say that you'd never heard of it before?
I mean, it just isn't out there. And I think the reason it's unknown is the name is tricky. And the training program to become a certified Feldenkrais practitioner, it's 800 hours over 4 years, typically broken up into 8 weeks, like 2 weeks here, 1 week here. It's 8 weeks spread out over the course of the year. Some training programs in the past have done 50 weeks of weekend trainings, but primarily the lessons are structured, or the training program is structured 8 weeks over the year. So to bring in working professionals into this modality is challenging. And
Mm.
then also the training itself doesn't have a lot of clarity because Moshe Feldenkrais, who developed the method, he he was a very educated man. He had a PhD from the Sorbonne. He was a self-made, educated man who came from, struggling means, born in present-day Ukraine, migrated himself ultimately to Paris, was educated, but he was very anti-educational systems because he felt that a lot of people who were educated were regurgitating. And so he did not want to give great clarity into what the method was. He wanted you, which is why it is spread out over 4 years, to introduce concepts and you really, your nervous system, embody and learn the method as opposed to regurgitating. So I think, unfortunately, I think that's a great philosophy if you're 18 years old and starting this program and you have 30 years to understand it. But I think in our modern world, having knowledge and being able to explain to people why the method is helpful for them is a good skill to have because people don't want to just say, "Hey, come get a lesson. It's magical. You're going to feel better." And so I think that's why it has been limited in scope and people knowing about it.
Mm. So you went on this 1 week kind of wellness retreat type thing. You were told that there were 24 free lessons online. What happened when you went back home after that week?
So I was absolutely committed to doing those 24 lessons. Primarily, I was feeling really good. I was also committed to not having back pain. And let me back up as to why I was so fearful about back pain. So in 1993, my mother was 53 years old and she was newly licensed as a psychologist after a career as being a psychiatric nurse. And she was working at a pain care center at helping people, counseling people to learn to live with their chronic pain. And she put her back out and ended up on disability. And she felt enormous guilt for telling people how to live with their pain because
Mm,
that is all they were offering.
mm,
And the only solutions that were offered to her were pain pills. And she was in recovery, so she would not take pain pills. And another alternative offered was back surgery. And so she opted for the surgery, which made the pain even worse. And they told her, give it 6 weeks, you will feel better in 6 weeks. So 6 weeks to the day after the surgery, she took her own life because she could not imagine living a life with this pain.
mm,
And so when I stood up after that first lesson with no back pain, I couldn't help but think how her outcome may have been different if she had had access to this method. And the method
mm,
even existed in
mm,
1993, but it was a very, very small community. So that frustrated me. And I was working at Facebook at the time, and our brains were wired for building for scale. Don't help a million people, help a billion people. So my thought, my frustration around this method not being available to more people is I thought, this community and these people, I've got to figure out how to work with them to help them scale this method to more people. How do we improve their training programs? What do we do to get this method to more people? But my first order of business was doing these 24 lessons.
mm,
And I began doing the 24 lessons. They were abbreviated versions of full lessons that she had, which was perfect for my inattentive skills and my busy schedule. And the lessons she shared with me were mostly 20 to 30 minutes long. And I would do them every day before work. And something beyond my posture and my back pain staying away is I began showing up before I even knew the term nervous system regulation. I that is what was happening to me. I began sleeping better, and I was like, "Why am I suddenly sleeping better?" And my thinking mind was, "Oh, there's a lot of rib opening lessons, so I'm breathing better, and because I'm breathing better, I'm sleeping better." But it was beyond that. It was really going into a meditative state because I had to listen so intently to the lesson and listen to myself and find a better way to move that because of my ADHD, traditional meditation and sitting still was not easy for me. And so I really understood people who are able to tap into meditation and the calming effect it gives you in the nervous system regulation. So I was showing up to work less reactive, and I wasn't having to hold in my reactivity, which I had been doing previously. I was just truly more regulated that I could co-regulate with other people better. Instead of having conflict with people, I could truly put myself in their shoes and understand why they may see things differently as me. And so everything just got a little bit softer and a little easier, even just when that within that 24 days of doing it.
Mm.
And
So
oh, go
that
ahead.
yeah, so that was your first 24 days after the initial week. How did you get from finishing those 24 days to then deciding to actually become a practitioner yourself?
Well, at first, I needed to do more lesson I began repeating those 24 lessons, but they weren't as magical, and I wasn't as regulated as the first time I did the 24 lessons. So I knew intuitively it was the novelty of the movements that made them so powerful. So I became went on a massive hunt and a collector of as many lessons as I could get to keep me going. But the traditional lessons were 45 minutes to an hour and a half, and I really didn't have that kind of time, but I was making the time for that. So I my initial thought was, how do I reach out to this organization? I really didn't think about being a practitioner initially, but I thought before I approach them and tell them I want to make their business better, I need to understand what's going on because
Mm.
I have no idea what's happening and I have no idea why I feel so good. So I looked into how to get trained, and that's when I saw it was 4 years, and it was 2014, so the next training program was not starting till 2016. So I applied for it and was accepted, and I thought, when I get to 2016 and I run out of vacation days, I'll quit Facebook at that point. I was able to make it work because frankly, when you have a regulated nervous system, you start to get along with your colleagues and your managers better, and somehow you end up with more flexibility. And I was able to complete the 4-year training program while still working at Facebook. And at the end of the training is when I decided to resign from Facebook. And my mentor said, before you build this app, because eventually it evolved into we need to build an app to make these lessons shorter and accessible so people can do this daily lesson because there are thousands of lessons and it's really expensive to collect 1,000 lessons. So my mentor said, before you build this app idea that you have, you really need to open a private practice because the only way to understand the method is to work with people who need help with this method. So I really backburnered scaling this to everybody and slowed down. And historically, I was a very impulsive, getting things done kind of person. And I think doing the method did invite me to slow down. And I completely backburnered taking this to millions of people to working with people one on one. So I opened a private practice and most of my clients I worked with were in chronic pain, And the two sources of my clients came from one of two books, Norman Doidge's book, The Brain's Way of Healing, and Vander Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score. And that's
Hmm.
most people would find it. There's not a lot of practitioners. I had a website up and running. So during the pandemic, I was actually working online with people. And then as things started to open up, I began working in person with people in my backyard or in a well ventilated room, triple masked. And because a lot of practitioners weren't practicing during
Mm.
that time. So I was able to build a pretty full practice and working with a wide variety of people that it still fascinates me how much this method can help so many people. But the primary core client I worked with was people in chronic pain.
Mm. So you started your training in 2016. So I guess you finished around 2019,
20
2020.
2020.
Yeah. Was that before the madness started or during?
Interestingly enough, I had 6 months left in my training. And when I resigned from Facebook, like January 2nd, 2020, not knowing I mean, I kinda knew the pandemic was coming because we had a lot of information at Facebook. We had canceled a global sales conference because of it in January, and but I knew this is what I wanted to do, and I knew I needed to leave Facebook in the rearview mirror to focus on this. So my training, we were supposed to graduate in May. It was delayed till August because we ended up doing our final training online. Um, but it really gave me the opportunity during those initial lockdowns to go deeper into the method. And I even watched Moshe Feldenkrais's last training in the 1980s was recorded on video. So during lockdowns, I went through and I saw him actually train the method and compare it to how my training was. And it was in August of 2020 is when my official graduation was, and that's when I opened my practice, which was really an online practice for the first 6 to 9 months, I believe, and then until I started seeing people in person.
Mm. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Looking back at those times, I find dates get a bit fuzzy. I think there was so much going on. You think, was it then or was it then or oh, I can't remember. But yeah, there was a lot to think about back in those days. So so you've been basically practicing on people for the last 6 years, let's say. So when you're working with people experiencing chronic pain, what patterns have you noticed about why pain often persists even after people have tried things like, physical therapy, stretching, strengthening, or chiropractic?
Well, I think persistent pain over time, I think of it in 2 ways: as chronic pain where the body has healed, but the brain is stuck in a loop. And what needs to happen is pattern interruption and interrupting that loop of pain. So often our lessons interrupt that loop by doing confusing movements, moving your eyes in a different direction. So a lot of people habitually keep their eyes with their head, but breaking those patterns up is important, so it's really in the brain. And I will also say that this is not a I don't think the Feldenkrais method is an end all be all. So my clients who had newer chronic pain, and I would define newer chronic pain as a few years, um, the the work we did together was incredibly effective in pretty short amount of time. But the clients who had had chronic pain for 15 or 20 years and had been living in chronic pain that long, they needed support in other ways. So they often would do brain training programs. And so I think finding new movement patterns gently with me and then also doing separate pain retraining programs together I saw good outcomes for that. And then the other persistent pain I would think about is more of a recurring pain, which is somebody who has pain, they go to see somebody and they get better and they feel relief, but then their nervous system goes back to the patterns because while that modality may have given them temporary relief, they the you, their nervous system and the underlying patterns have not changed. And so what the Feldenkrais method does is we work with the nervous system to learn and adapt new patterns. And let me clarify a little bit, since I didn't yet. So within the Feldenkrais method, there are two modalities. So there are hands-on, traditional hands-on, where you're working one-on-one with a client, and that is called functional integration. And those lessons are rooted in functional movement. So, as a Feldenkrais practitioner, we do not diagnose, treat, or cure. We are movement educators. And so, when a client would come to me and I would ask them, what is the goal of our work today? They would often say, take my pain away. And I would say, well, what movement are you limited in doing? What do you want to be able to do after this lesson? What is the pain holding you back from doing? And I was hopeful they would say something like sign up for a 10K, go play pickleball, but often the answer was something like I'd really like to be able to put my own socks on. My hands are in so much pain, I cannot put my socks on. Or I'd like to be able to do my own laundry. I can't lift a laundry basket because of the pain in my arms and my shoulders. So, as we work with the lesson with the student, my brain is going to how do I improve their movement? And it may be curious ways that may not feel like it's a reaching lesson or a walking lesson. But what my brain is rooted in as I work with the student is what is that functional movement? So often we'll do a reference movement before the lesson. So if their goal is to carry a laundry basket, I would have them lift a very light book and see how that felt to lift the book. We would do the lesson. And then after the lesson, I would say, let's return to lifting this book. Does it feel lighter now? And that is the way we think about the lessons. And what I learned very early in my practice was after a lesson, if I said, well, how's your pain now? Often the answer was, well, actually, it was gone, but it just came back. So when we think no pain, take away pain, 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 all the brain is hearing is pain.
Hmm.
And so I think the benefit of thinking functionally and how do you move better gets that brain out of the loop of focusing on the pain. And I think that's so incredibly important to know. And I also learned as a new practitioner, when a client would come back the next time, early on, I'd say, how's your pain this week? And I learned not to do that. I would say,
Mm.
how's your movement? What kind of activities have you been thinking in the positive and getting the brain out of that hyper focus on the pain. And believe me, I get it. Once I had that 3 weeks of pain, it's really hard to think beyond the pain when you are in that type of pain.
Mm. So you mentioned that Feldenkrais has two modalities. You said one is so just so I'm clear, one is hands-on and one is functional integration, or were they the same thing and there is another one?
So the functional integration is one-on-one, and typically it's hands-on movement. And the benefit of that is we move slower and smaller than people would move if they're left to their own devices. We are all programmed to go fast and big, and what we say these lessons are is a dance of the nervous system. So I need to be in a very slow, gentle, easy state and moving them very slowly, much smaller and much slower than they ever would. So that really, I think, is the core benefit of the hands-on lesson. I will also say in my practice, as I worked with clients over time, often I would give them self-directed movements. So I would one-on-one be guiding them because I believe the learning is more transformative when you are moving yourself with attention. So that then mirrors the second modality within the method, which is awareness through movement, which is traditionally group live classes which is like the class, my first class, where you are listening to the teacher's verbal cues and you are doing self-directed movements. The disadvantage of those lessons are when we are going on our own, we're going bigger and faster. And that's okay in the beginning with the nervous system. So I taught live classes at a public library, and the students who were going really big and really fast, initially I thought, okay, I'm never going to see this person again. They don't understand what we're doing at all. And that was always the person who came up to me after the lesson and said, that was life changing. And they were the person who kept coming back. And
Mm,
so it's okay to go big and fast because you need to do where your nervous system is. But over time, with a regular practice, students tend to find going slower and going smaller because it's completely counterintuitive to our culture, but
mm,
it is the smaller and the slower, and current neuroplastic science backs this up now, that it is the slowness and the smallness and the focused attention is when the brain fires up for those new neural pathways. And also what I think is fascinating about neuroscience now is it's in the mistakes. You actually need to do the lessons wrong in order for the nervous system to learn. So if we were to demonstrate the movements to you and you were to mimic us and you were to nail it and do it right the first time, your nervous system doesn't learn anything.
mm,
And yeah, so it's in the confusion and the mistakes and doing it wrong, which is so counterintuitive to our culture of getting it right.
mm. Yeah, I mean, when you think about life in general, we generally learn far more when we make mistakes than when we get things right, you know? Um, wow, there's so many different directions I could go in right now because it's making so much sense. Like on one hand, you're regulating the nervous system, and for the audience, the more excitable, overactive your nervous system is, the more likely you're going to experience pain. That's just how the body is wired. The body is wired for safety, and what pain is a warning system of your external and your internal environment. So if there's danger, your brain will interpret pain, right? So if you're regulating that nervous system, if you like, if you're calming down that nervous system, that in itself is going to lower your pain, or going to increase your pain threshold. So something that you might have two people next to each other, and it might be something as simple as dragging your finger along your arm. In one person, it would be nothing, and the other person, it would be extreme pain, right? But the likelihood is the person that doesn't feel the pain has probably got a regulated nervous system, whereas the other one's probably got an overexcited or sensitized nervous system. So from that aspect, it makes complete sense to me. But the other aspect is, again, looking at pain science, one of the things that's really important is to build confidence in movement. One of the things that is important to do when you're in pain is to try to still create movement every day. As not as much as possible, because that obviously you can overdo it, but to move in a way that is comfortable and safe, that can build confidence that actually you can move without pain. And it seems to me like from what you're suggesting, these little movements are also creating confidence that people can move without pain. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense, and it's in the functional integration hands-on work, our first goal of the lesson is safety and communicating safety to the nervous system. So often with my clients who had the most chronic pain, we would spend 20 to 30 minutes of the first lesson finding the right pads, pillows, just getting them set up for comfort because we wanted to communicate to their nervous system. This, I mean, typically I worked with them on a table. Sometimes they were in a chair if if lying down wasn't comfortable for them. But first and foremost was just creating to the nervous system, you're in a safe space. And often I would do some self-directed movement so that they would feel comfortable. And if they did self-directed movement, almost always they went too big. So I would say roll your head side to side, don't get to do less than a stretch, do very lightly. And everybody goes to the end of the range. And when you go to the end of the range, which is what you do in stretching, you communicate to your nervous system that you have limitations. So what we want to do is do less than the end of range. And it really takes a special discipline. And to this day, I do lessons and it feels so good to get in that stretch. And it's because for 50 some years, what I was doing was going to the end of the range. But I know the effectiveness if I have that discipline to stay in a very easy range, but it's really counterintuitive. So in the lesson, the first thing we do is communicate safety. The next thing we do is we support the students' existing patterns. So understanding what that pattern is and taking them deeper into that pattern. For example, if somebody has a very hunched posture, we hunch them even more. We go deeper into the pattern that's comfortable for them instead of correctively going up, because then the nervous system says, no, 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 that's not my pattern. Take me back to where I was. But when you support them and go deeper into their existing pattern, the nervous system feels safe and it opens up the pathways for actually over time adapting and having the possibility to stand up more upright. But it's going deeper into the patterns rather than being corrective because again, we're teaching the nervous system it's safe. And I mean, I will say I had clients come in who had been in the same PT program. And I will say, I think PTs are amazing, and I rely on them myself for strength training and finding, again, the Feldenkrais method is an incomplete method because we don't do muscle training and muscle conditioning. And I think that's an important part of biomechanics. And so you will need to find a different practitioner or a PT to help with those things. But I would have clients that had chronic pain and I would ask them, well, what else did you do this week? The pain came back. What else are you doing? Well, I just went to PT this week. And I'm like, well, tell me what you did in PT this week. And they'd show me the stretch they were doing. And I would say, okay, so if you're PT, I can't tell you not to do what somebody's advising you to do. But what I can say is the weeks you're seeing me, I'd like for you not to do those stretching exercises. And let's just see what happens when you're seeing me that you stop stretching. And I have to tell you, I'll have a pretty much 100% track record on this. When they stopped stretching, and I often wonder, was it simply the stopping the stretching that led to their pain relief? Or was it stopping stretching plus finding the new movement patterns with them? But I had one client that came in tears one day, and I said, "What's going on?" And she goes, "I just came from my PT of 15 years, and I broke up with him, and it's the longest relationship I've had besides my husband." But I realized the stretching I've been doing for 15 years. And again, I will say, if I think if a modality is working, do it. I think there's a lot of modalities that are helpful, but if you've been doing the same modality and it's not working, it's not because you're broken, it's because your nervous system needs to find a different path of healing, because our millions of years of evolution have led to nervous systems and bodies that heal. So if you cut your finger, it's gonna be healed in a few days. We know how to heal. That inner wisdom is in there to heal, but sometimes we may be doing things that are interfering with that healing. And so I think this method is incredibly supportive to healing.
Mm. Yeah, you just reminded me of someone from my old tennis club, and in the region of London where I used to live, all the tennis players used to go to one particular physio who was based at one of the tennis clubs, and everyone used to tell me how amazing he was as a physio. And I used to say, "Oh, okay, that's really, that's really good." And I remember I was talking to one guy, and he'd had a history of tennis elbow, which is actually quite rare in tennis players, funnily enough. Um, and he said, "Oh yeah, I'm still going to see this physio. It's really good." I was like, "Okay, how long have you been seeing him?" "Oh, a year." And I'm like, "Have you still got tennis elbow?" And he's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Oh, okay." I just thought, what kind of logic is that? You know? Um, but
That
yeah.
that that temporary relief can be addictive, right? And then
Mm,
I mean, I had one client who had severe scoliosis, and she was convinced that seeing a chiropractor twice a month was just what she had been doing for decades. And she was like, "I'm fine. I just have to see my chiropractor twice a month." And she began seeing me, and she just reduced. So then it was once a month, and then it was once every other month. And she began to learn that then incorporating the recorded lessons at home complemented that, and over time, the amount of visits, because the nervous system is changing, and it wasn't her scoliosis that was causing the pain, it was the muscle imbalances. And what our lessons do is we even out the muscle imbalances that are causing the scoliosis. Does not cause the pain. Our bones are designed to move, and our muscles are designed to adapt, but finding the relief of those muscle imbalances can lead to changing those movement patterns that can help long term. And it's about changing the patterns so that you're not reliant on someone else to fix you. And I get it. I had outsourced my healing for a long time, and I think I had mentioned to you 5 years before I put my back out, I did Ironman Hawaii. So, and with no body awareness. I mean, I had no business swimming at Ironman Hawaii. I really did not know how to swim very well. And I had no kinesthetic awareness of my body. So to get to that finish line meant I had a huge support team to keep me out of pain. So I had massage therapists, rolfer, acupuncturist, ART specialist, chiropractor. I spent more time with other people treating my body than I did actually training for
wow.
Ironman. So it was
Wow.
a full-time job basically to get
Mm,
there, And now that I found this method, I just don't have to outsource my healing and my feeling. It's really tapping into my own internal wisdom in how to move and feel better.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned about scoliosis, and obviously there's two types of scoliosis. You've got a structural scoliosis where the bones do become fixed, which normally happens in childhood in those cases. And then you've got what we call a functional scoliosis where the muscles have pulled the spine out of its, let's just call it its optimal position. Let's for 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 this purpose. But then the other thing is, well, what holds the muscles in place? It's the nervous input into the muscles, right? So again, it's that I see that as there's little I do know about Feldenkrais. Again, that's the beauty, right? Because you're working very much with the nervous system. Every week, I meet people who've been told their pain is just aging, just wear and tear, or something they just have to live with. And almost always, there's a deeper cause that's being missed. Gut stress, emotional load, sleep disruption, food sensitivities, poor breathing patterns, movement imbalances. And when we look at everything together, the picture becomes clear. If you feel something important has been overlooked, book a discovery call with me at bodycheck.co.uk/consultation. That's bodycheck.co.uk/consultation. All right, back to the episode.
Yes, and in the patterns of I had noticed when I was working at Facebook, we did a lot of, we all now do Zoom calls, but we did a lot of video conferencing there. And I became aware of this. My head was always tilted to the right, and I would see myself in the video and I would correct myself and straighten up my head. But it wasn't until I started doing this method that I realized the head tilt was actually coming from my ribs on the right were shortened and my ribs on the left were lengthened, which was a curvature through my spine that resulted in a head tilt. So I had this curvature that and that's still my pattern, and I return to that pattern because it's been there for so many decades. But I now have been able to even that out and have a straighter spine, which results in my head sitting more on top of my cervical spine when I'm on video conferences.
Mm. Yeah, interesting, interesting. Something you mentioned earlier was um, habitual patterns. Like you mentioned, people kind of having what we call an increased kyphosis. But how do habitual movement patterns contribute to ongoing pain, and why are they so difficult for people to recognize on their own?
Well, we're all operating on autopilot because if we had to think about how we walked or think about how we move, that is mentally fatiguing to our brain and our nervous system. So we are on autopilot, but for whatever reason, from a past injury, for me, I was tall and always wanted to make myself smaller. So I had a hunched posture from a very young age. So over time, that hunched posture led to inefficient breathing. Um, so ultimately, when I put my back out, putting my pants on, it wasn't putting my pants on that put the back out. It was decades of a pattern of this forward posture that I had. But the habitual patterns are difficult to interrupt because we are designed to work on autopilot. And breaking up those habitual patterns have to be done slowly, easily. Because if you think about, often people think pain is inevitable with age. And it is not the pain that's inevitable with age. It's those decades of movement patterns eventually catching up to you. So it is the movement patterns that may be wearing out your joints, or often, even the joints are okay. It's the muscle imbalances from those habitual patterns. So gently and slowly breaking out of those habitual patterns can help. And I also had one client who she put her back out unloading the dishwasher. So she said, "I've just adapted. I only load the dishwasher on the top shelf and dishes don't go on the bottom." And so we worked with her functionally. It was not unloading the dishwasher that put her back out. It was decades of patterns that she had that caught up to her in that one moment. And
Mm.
so we worked on those patterns to open up new patterns. So bending over and reaching was something that was available to her as opposed to limiting her life. Because over time, if you limit bending over, that's going to limit where you're going long term in life. So it's just the decades will cause muscle imbalances and joints wearing out. So often, I would have clients who had knee replacement surgeries and yes, the joints were worn out at that point, and so perhaps they did need that knee surgery. But we would work on their patterns because often they'll tell a patient, "Well, we're gonna do your right knee this year, and, inevitably, you're gonna have to do the left one." Well, inevitably, you're gonna have to do the left one if you don't change your movement patterns, but if you do change your movement patterns, you can avoid those surgeries.
Mm. Yeah. So the Feldenkrais method was developed decades before modern neuroscience confirmed many of its principles that we know today. What does our current understanding of neuroplasticity help explain about why awareness through movement lessons can help people retrain movement patterns and reduce pain?
The neuroscience now backs up the importance of novelty to firing up those new neural pathways. So I think that's why intuitively Moshe Feldenkrais created so many lessons. He knew you needed novelty. And he said in the 1950s, he said he was not after flexible bodies, he was after flexible brains. So he knew that what we were after was changing the brain, not the body. And modern neuroscience did not really validate the word neuroplasticity until the 1990s. So this research is now catching up, which is why everybody in the Feldenkrais community is so excited about modern neuroplastic research. The other thing is slowing down. So you really have to slow the movement down for your brain to detect the differences and to continue building those neural pathways. And repetition is so important. So what's different about our lessons, it's not exercise where you're repeating mindlessly on autopilot. It's repetition with variation. So as you're varying those movements, you're making the mistakes. So neuroscience says you need to make the mistakes. So you repeat with variations. And so you will do the movement 1 millimeter one direction and then change it a millimeter that direction. And when you explore and you're curious, when you hit that more efficient way of doing it, the neural pathways really light up and are like, "Ah, the nervous system knows that's the one." Now, if you then go back to your habitual patterns, which you will, because you can't erase old neural pathways, you can build new ones and you can strengthen the new ones with repetition, but you can't erase the old ones. So having that repetition. So my pattern is a hunched pattern. I can't erase that. So when I'm working long days at the computer, I end up in a hunched posture. That's my nervous system loves that pattern. But what these lessons do is they open up new options on those new neural pathways. And what I often told my clients was you're gonna toggle between your old pattern and your new pattern. And when you catch yourself in your old pattern, don't be corrective of it and don't self-blame yourself because that's a pattern that's really strong. But when you do have awareness, experiment with the new pattern. And also, if we were to fix people and change them, you don't have the musculoskeletal system to support that new pattern long term. You're now building those tiny little muscles that are supporting the new pattern. So, toggling between your old pattern and your new pattern is very welcome in this method as opposed to being corrective. And so, back to what neuroscience supports, reducing effort, doing less. Your brain gives you get more sensory sensitivity when you are reducing your effort. And I think the best part of neuroscience, it tells us that rest is important. So within our lessons, we build in a lot of rest and students are instructed to take rest. So everybody's nervous system is different. If you need more rest than the teacher is giving you, take a rest because the neural pathways are not built while you're doing the movement. It is actually built in the rest. And the neuroscience, I'm guessing they probably studied movement patterns like golfing or tennis or some type of activity, but they actually measured when the neural pathways were built. And it was after the new movement was learned. And that if you skip the rest, that movement pattern you learned is not created in the brain. So it's in the rest. So that is why the rests are built into the lessons. And then the sleep that night. So clients would often tell me after one lesson, that is the best night's sleep I've had in a long time because when you're learning those new movement patterns, the it takes a lot of energy for the brain to build those new neural pathways, and so it is in the sleep those neural pathways are embedded.
Very interesting. One of the things that you've mentioned a few times is mistakes. What does a mistake look like or feel like?
It I don't you know when you're no longer making the mistake. So in the traditional lessons, Moshe Feldenkrais said he was trying to make the impossible possible, the possible easy, and the easy elegant. And you know when it clicks. And in the traditional lessons, he would give verbal cues and you're like, "That is not possible. My body will not do that." And in my training, I would be very frustrated and I'm like, "This is not possible. My body does not do this." And then but you just keep trying and varying and then click. You sit up effort, you'll be on your belly and then you'll do the movements and then suddenly you're like, "How am I sitting upright? How did that even happen?" So, the mistakes aren't always like a you just, you know when that you have a breakthrough, and
Mm,
it is the frustration and being okay with being in the process and being okay that it's not the right one and having a play. That's also what neuroscience tells us is that having a playful mindset helps with the brain wiring. So if you're too goal oriented, then you have to have fun and be playful in the process. And as a side outcome, pain goes away, movement efficiency. But I found in my own practice as I went through series of lessons that were sold for a specific reason, and I was doing a lesson to be goal oriented, I never enjoyed those lessons because I was too fixated on the goal. But when I did the lesson purely for the pleasure of the lesson and the process of the lesson, then sometimes the surprise effect is improved movement patterns or pain reduction.
mm. So it sounds like to me when you're first doing these movements, you don't know what you don't know.
Completely, and being uncomfortable with that uncertainty, and I think I fell in love with the method because those first 24 lessons were titled number 1, number 2, number she had no title and no description. So it was a mystery to me, and I got lost in the process. I wasn't like, "This is a back pain relief lesson. This is a knee pain relief lesson." It was just getting lost in the process and the curiosity, and I think where we are today in our culture, especially with AI, we just wanna ask a question and have the answer. But we know as children, we learned math by struggling with the math, not by looking at the answer in the back. You're never gonna learn how to do math if you don't struggle. But it doesn't have to be it can be a playful struggle and a playful enjoying the process. And even it's interesting because I come from a business background and have always been, what is the outcome? I like having the answers. I like having the outcome. And it's interesting as I was working with one of the teachers who worked with me on contributing lessons for this app, and we were here recording videos of her doing lessons, and we were setting up lighting and setting up things, and I was frustrated because building this type of business is new for me, and I'm like, "Oh, I didn't know this. I don't know about lighting. I don't know about this." And she comes from an artist background. And she said, "I think it's beautiful to watch you in the process." And I'm like, "Oh, like it's so important in life to let go of the outcomes and really enjoy the process." And I would say doing these lessons, letting go of the outcome and enjoying slowing down, enjoying doing less. It's such a different way than we're operating today. Doing a lesson to not know the answer or the outcome and have the mystery of it, I think is a beautiful way to work in our achievement oriented life. I will also say that a lot of my chronic pain clients, I would ask them what they were doing to heal, and they would be seeing 5 different practitioners on my they were overscheduling themselves. They were type A people who were focused on their healing. I must heal. I'm on disability. I gotta get better in 3 weeks because I gotta go back to work and I must heal. And it was that goal oriented, I must remove my pain, that was actually keeping them in the pain. And
Mm,
when they just tapped into the process and the inner wisdom of their healing and softened, that the outcomes changed.
mm. Yeah, as you were talking then, three three words beginning with P popped into my head: play, patience, and persistence.
I think that's a beautiful recap. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, patience and persistence are two words I use a lot with my clients as well because sometimes healing isn't linear, or hardly ever is linear, to be honest. So that's where the patience comes in, but the persistence is you got to keep doing the work, right?
Well, and I like to think of it as keep doing the play. And
Mm,
I do the lessons daily for my nervous system regulation, but I if I can have people love the lessons half, a quarter, 10% of how much I love them, because I have always been type A, goal oriented, which has served me well in life overall, but I never slowed down and listened. And I have so much pleasure in the curiosity and the slowing down. And so being persistent in the enjoyment and the playfulness and just relishing in tuning out the outside world, which is a great thing to do right now, and go really deep into how we feel, which can be really uncomfortable at first. If you, I mean, what a lot of lessons do is they go into these deep, long scans of trace your shoulder blade, and I felt very, uh, just inadequate because I was like, "I don't feel my shoulder blade. I don't feel." I didn't have answers to the questions, and I needed to be okay with being like, "I don't have the answer yet, but I'm gonna keep tapping in and inquiring," and over time, the awareness builds. But being okay that you don't know the answer, and I think with pain, so many people want certainty. So and so many people are attracted to healers who say, "This is the answer for do buy this product, this healed me, this will heal you, buy it." And
mm,
people want that certainty, but the reality is we are all so different. We all have different shapes and sizes. We all have different nervous systems. We all have different histories, and what works for us and really learning for us to be the coach of our healing. And that's why I love your podcast. You have such a variety of people, and clearly your listeners are curious. They're tuning in and they're listening to a lot of different modalities and take what you can from one. And if it's not for you, including this method, if it's not for you, then you leave it and you move on to the next episode. But it's finding that confidence and and not having the certainty of what's wrong with you. And my mentor taught me, because I would say, why am I built this way? Why? And she said, it doesn't matter why. You are this way today. And the good news is you can change it. It doesn't matter why, what your history is. It doesn't matter. But you can change from where you are today. And if you get caught up in the diagnosis and the why, you're going to spend a lot of time not healing, just accepting
mm,
you are where you are today, and then knowing you're gonna heal and tapping into it, I think is l being our own coach and being able to leave what doesn't work for you is really important in healing.
mm. Yeah, one of the things I was thinking about as you were speaking then, I'm thinking if I was to do Feldenkrais, because I do have, I guess, a fairly good level of kinesthetic awareness, would I actually get less from it compared to someone that possibly doesn't? Because I'm assuming I might make less mistakes, so therefore my learning wouldn't be as big. Would that be correct?
I think that's a great question, and I think that that's what's great about some of the lessons is that they are confusing. So letting go of what you know and tapping back into the curiosity and having that beginner's mindset. And but I think that's a really great question because I worked with athletes in my practice too, and they actually moved quite beautifully and they did have great kinesthetic awareness, but they responded really beautifully as well when they moved out of performance and they moved into curiosity. And I think
Mm,
having the body awareness can be good, but tapping back into that beginner's mindset and seeing what you may not know and feel things in a different way, because I
mm,
think you can be with some of the lessons, you can be really surprised and and to be acceptable of doing it wrong.
mm. Yeah, and it's interesting because again, when you was talking about play and not being concerned with the outcome, it reminded me just over a week ago, I had 4 days, 2 hours a day with my friend who's also a tennis coach, and we were doing 2 hour sessions every day. And he's a very, very deep thinker when it comes to tennis, unlike anyone else I know, to be honest. And he taught me a couple of years ago, like a foundational theory of his that makes shot decision almost automatic. So you don't have to think. And that was really, really useful. And then this time around, he showed me something else that he's come up with, which is what he calls tennis archetypes, which was like, well, as soon as he said that, my ears just pricked up. Like, oh, wow, this sounds interesting. And he's basically mapped 4 different types of tennis archetype. I think he said there's others underneath that as well, but there are 4 main ones. And he got me to do a questionnaire and he worked out my archetype. And then he was getting me to play like my archetype, which is also the way I'd already envisaged in my head how I want to play tennis. But the fear of playing a bad shot or the fear of losing prevented me from playing that way. And when we were practicing, not only was I playing much better than I've ever played, it felt like I was playing, like I was just having fun. It wasn't like I was playing tennis. I was just like a little kid again because I was playing exactly the way I wanted to play. And even if, I hit the net or I hit the ball out, I didn't care because I was having so much fun anyway. But the end goal was I was playing much better than I've ever played. So it's quite interesting how it matches what you were saying, that, if you're not too concerned about the end result, but you play, again, I guess my body was learning a new way to play.
And I mean that we saw in the Olympics, Alyssa Liu, and letting go of the stress of winning the gold, and she did it for the pleasure, and then she won the gold.
I
So
don't
I
know. I
think,
don't know who that is.
oh, that in the Olympics, Alyssa Liu was the gold medal ice skater,
Right.
and she had been ice skating from a very young age. And her father was her coach, and everything in her life was orchestrated for her, for performing and winning the gold. And I think she was in her early teens, and she quit. She just said, I can't do this. She had mental health issues. She quit. She dropped out. And then she came back and she said, my dad is not going to be my coach. I am going to do this for the pure joy of doing this. It was so exciting to watch her with the other athletes who didn't perform well, and how she would hug them and just bring them up, which is such a difference to where we were decades ago in this competitiveness. And she just said, I'm only coming back to ice skate for the pleasure and the joy of doing it. And she has really non-traditional hair. She has a ring on the inside of her lip. She just is like, I am not going to fit the ice skater type, and I'm only doing this for the pleasure of it. If I want to, I'm not doing this to win the gold. And who won the gold? She did. And I encourage you to watch some of the videos of her, because she just exudes such joy. And she let go of winning the gold, and she just has so much joy. It's exciting to have that as a role model for all young athletes, and letting go. I mean, look at so many Olympic athletes end up with mental health issues. So finding the joy in what they're doing younger, I think is such a tremendous role model.
Mm. Yeah. At the end of the day, that's why we start playing sport, because it's fun, right? And then you get very good, and then it doesn't become fun anymore. It becomes serious. And that's not really there's a deep rabbit hole about what sports are really all about. But for most of us, it's just about having fun. You know. So, Beverly, I've got one more big question for you. So, for someone who is currently in pain, what would be a simple and realistic way for them to begin exploring awareness through movement lessons to start improving comfort and mobility?
Well, I would say first, starting with your own curiosity. So I think what I would often do with my clients when they were in a lot of pain, we often the first lesson, we didn't do a lot of movement. And so I was thinking about this actually in the last couple of days, what people can do on their own, even before they do an actual lesson. So what I would often do with my clients, moving them much at all was not available. I would often put my hand on their ribs and I would ask them to breathe in and expand those ribs and then let it release. And sometimes when you create a little bit of tension in a very safe from the inside out, that starts to move around those intercostal muscles that are holding really tight. And when you move one set of ribs in one area, there's a ripple effect that goes through other areas. So I think that is something that people can explore on their own. Another thing that was really effective in my private practice was if a client had shoulder pain, and I was really afraid to do this in the beginning, and I thought this is counterintuitive, but my trainer is like, it's so effective, it works every time. So if they had shoulder pain, I would push their shoulder into the table, and that increase in tension and then the release gave them a lot of release. So as you're lying in bed, very gently, not ambitiously at all, as you're lying in bed where you may have a source of pain, push into the surface. If you're comfortable on the floor, or if you're in your bed, just increase that tension a little bit and then release. And that may give you release. And then if you are interested in exploring Feldenkrais classes, when you feel comfortable for it, in the United States, we have Feldenkrais.com where you can search for Feldenkrais practitioners and also for live classes. So you could do that globally, tap in, or just search online for in your region for a Feldenkrais practitioner. And then I have built an app called Pauseture, and it's a take of Moshe Feldenkrais didn't believe in posture. So a lot of people in the community are like, that's not reflective of what we don't care about posture. We care about movement. But Moshe Feldenkrais had the term acture, which is being able to move in any direction. So posture was a variation of acture for me. But we have about 365 lessons because my goal was to make something affordable and accessible because, again, the novelty is so important. And I think back to my mom, who was very financially constrained, and she did not have the money to go to a health and wellness resort. She did not have the money to go to a massage therapist. She was trapped in the insurance program and what they were offering her. So
Mhm.
she did not seek outside because she did not have the money for that. And so my why for creating this app was to help people like my mom who were financially constrained, and knowing the novelties of the lessons are so important. So I have created an app that has 365 lessons, and we built the app to just be filterable by function. And I love that because you can pick the orientation you're willing to lie in. You can pick the duration you have for that moment in time, so starting smaller. And that's how we launched the app. We got overwhelming feedback that people wanted to be guided. So we now have a 21 lesson series to guide you through, and you can do the 21 lessons to guide you through. And then we have 21 more lessons, and we have different series and themes to explore. But I personally love the filter to find to search for the function you want to improve on, and then do the lessons for the function you want to improve on, and just really enjoy the lessons. And I will also say that at the end of my training, I got a lesson from my trainer, and she has been training for decades and has trained thousands of people. And she said, "Of all the people I have trained, you are the most changed person I've ever seen over a 4-year period." And I promise you, it was not because of the training, because I was working full time during the training. I was on Zoom calls, I was taking calls. I was quite distracted during my training, unfortunately. But I'm probably the most consistent person with doing the lessons. So I would say that consistency is more important than duration for long-term movement. And again,
Mm.
the lessons aren't you can't do a search for back pain. I think we did add in lower back release, but it's about improving your movement comfortably, safely, so that your nervous system can adapt to comfortable movement. And then a positive outcome of that is possible pain reduction and 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 over time. But really the focus is improving your movement patterns. It's not a pain release app. It's safely and comfortably adapting your nervous system to find new patterns of movement.
Do you have anything related to athletes?
Actually, yes, you can filter on function, improve your running, improve I don't know that we have tennis. I think we do actually. Yes, we do. We have racket sports, so you can improve pickleball, tennis, you can again, in my private practice, I worked with a lot of athletes, surfing, martial arts, so you can filter by athletic performance as well as people move out of their pain and they wanna start thinking about, and so, for example, we have swimming lessons, so for me doing this, as I mentioned, when I did Ironman, I honestly didn't know how to swim, and I was 42 when I did Ironman, and I'm 59 now, and my swim time is significantly better today than it was
Mm.
then, and I could only really learn how to swim because I now have the kinesthetic awareness to understand rotation and understand how much power I'm getting from my pelvis. Before I was just swimming with all arms. So we have a lot of lessons for pretty much a lot of athletes. We also have by musical performance because musicians often have repetitive strain. So
Mhm.
you can filter lessons by musical instrument as well, because this method has longstanding been very big in the, musician space because of repetitive strain from, playing an instrument.
Excellent. That sounds great. And what's next for you, Beverly?
I'm going to continue to have conversations like this to help I love that your listeners are curious and they're looking, but there's a lot of people out there that assume that pain with age is inevitable, and I want to have questions. I want to help people understand that pain is not inevitable with age, that we're just on autopilot because our nervous systems were not flawed. We didn't do anything wrong. Our nervous systems were designed to be on autopilot. And we just sometimes need to interrupt that and help you safely find new options. So, just having more conversations like this and the Posture app, I have self-funded this. I have a very small team that is building it. We take every user's feedback and we're constantly iterating, improving the product, adding new series, adding new lessons. So to continue evolve the product as well so that it's helpful for people both in pain and performance.
And where can people find you online? Where do you want to send people?
Pauseture, Pauseture.com is our website, and that will tell you more about the app. And then again, if people want to find a Feldenkrais practitioner and supplement that with posture lessons, um, you can search for a local practitioner online.
Awesome. Great stuff. Beverly, I've really enjoyed this discussion today. I mean, I knew a little bit about Feldenkrais before, but I feel like you've really filled me in terms of what it does and how it works and who it can help. So I've really, really enjoyed talking with you today.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, it's been great. So that's it from Beverly and me for this week. But be sure to tune in, same time, same place, next week on Beyond the Pain. Thanks for listening to Beyond the Pain. If this episode resonated, please follow the show, leave a review, or share it with someone you know who's been struggling. And remember, pain is not permanent. With the right insight and support, you can turn it into power. Until next time, stay open, stay strong, and keep moving beyond the pain.